What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the competitive July 2021 format. There's nothing like a new ban list to usher in the new month, and there's nothing like a remote duel YCS, which is right around the corner, to get people excited about playing in the new format. We've got some preliminary results from the previous weekend, which was the first official weekend of the new format. We had some tournaments take place prior to that, but this is the first big wave of results we have. There's some Yu-Gi-Oh! Day events that actually got a lot of results in, so we've got a pretty good amount of data to go off of, so let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off at number 5, we have Dogmatica Invoked Shaddoll. This deck is currently the 5th most represented deck in the online environment when you look at it in the aggregate based off of the results that are available online, and this deck is really no surprise that it's still in the top 5 meta decks because it has been for the past several months, because the deck is still able to do a lot of really strong things, being able to be this very strong +1 engine because you have the invoked cards, and then you get to supplement it with the Dogmatica cards, which are equally as strong, and go into stuff like El Shaddoll Winda. The deck just harmonizes so well together, and Winda can actually put a damper on a lot of the top tier strategies, because if your opponent doesn't have an out to it, which a lot of decks are having to play out of engine cards to specifically negate Winda, that they're also playing for other cards as well, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I mean, Winda restricting you to one special summon in a game that's special summon dependent, that can just be all it takes to win the game straight out. I've got a sample Dogmatica Invoked Shaddoll list for you guys to take a look at here in case you want to test out the deck for yourself or see what the decks are starting to look like as we enter this new July format. This deck currently boasts a 59% win rate in the online environment, which is really good. Anytime a deck is nearing 60% or above 60%, it is definitely something to be feared. And taking a look at the list, it's basically everything we've come to expect from this deck thus far. The only thing you're really going to see changing is maybe the amount of Shaddolls that the deck decides to play and in what quantities. You also have the other specific cards, like what your specific defensive cards are going to be, which in this case we see cards like Triple Tactics, Talent, Infinite Impermanence. These will always tend to change depending on the metagame. We also have stuff like Effect Veiler and Ghost Spell in here as well. Ghost Spell is seeing a ton of popularity at the moment, but overall Invoke Shaddoll, a very solid strategy. It's pretty tried and true, and at this point it's something that people are probably very comfortable with falling back on, especially in a more unexplored format, because we have a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And so for those reasons, that's why I've got Invoked Shaddoll coming in at number 5. But coming in at number 4, the more things change, the more things stay the same, because we have another top contender from the previous format prior to the July 2021 ban list, and that deck is Prank Kids. You know, one card starter is still the name of the game, and this deck is boasting a 60% win rate in the online environment right now. Go figure, that's not a big shocker, but this deck is the 8th most represented deck online as it currently sits. Actually the lowest out of all the decks that are on this top 5 list, but still definitely something you need to fear, because even though it isn't as represented as a lot of the other decks on this list, it has some of the highest win rate amongst all of them, and that's something that you really need to take into account. Again, here's a sample deck list for you to go ahead and take notes from, whether it's a deck you want to play for yourself or just to study so that you can figure out the best way to counteract it if you do come across it at your locals or in any larger tournament you might compete in online. It's pretty cookie cutter from what I was able to discern. We are seeing cards such as Phantasme making their way into the main deck. Phantasme is super strong because there are a lot of link focused decks running around at the moment, and being able to generate that card advantage is very nice. We also once again see Ghost Spell here in the main deck. You're going to see this a lot, and even that one cheeky copy of Mystic Mind just to blow out those combo players that don't have a way to out it. I like it. It's a nice little touch. We also see the Pankratops in here as well, which is just a nice card for if you lose the die roll. Pankratops is a card that's borderline bannable, so I think that's fantastic too. And once again, for the defensive options, we see the Infinite Impermanence. Prank Kids is just a fantastic deck because you have an engine that just relies on a one card starter. Your engine is rather compact, and so you have room to play a lot of other cards to be able to deal with a lot of other certain matchups. We've seen this in the past with decks such as Zodiac that are able to accommodate this as well. And while Prank Kids is more of a combo deck and it's much more explosive in that regard, it's still able to accommodate all these other defensive cards to be able to prepare to counteract all the other threats in the current meta. And again, similar to Dogmatica Invoked Shaddoll, it's a strategy that we've already seen be very effective. Prank Kids was a tier 1 contender in the previous format, and moving into this new format, decks such as Dragon Link took a pretty significant hit, but Prank Kids came out completely unscathed, and so just in the initial stages, there really is no surprise to see Prank Kids still at the top tiers of competitive play. So for those reasons, that's why I've got Prank Kids coming in at number 4. And just a quick reminder before we go on to number 3, if you plan on purchasing any cards as a result of watching this video, just use my affiliate links down in the description because you save 5% off cards you would already be purchasing otherwise using code Cimoooooooo5 on some of those links, and it all helps directly support the channel. But let's go ahead and move on to number 3. Now, coming in at number 3, we have a deck that I didn't expect to see this high on the top 5 meta decks list, but the numbers don't lie here, and it looks like that deck is Virtual World. Yeah, Virtual World coming in at number 3 with a 60% win rate and is the 5th most represented deck in the online environment as it currently stands. Why is this? Well, obviously this deck has lost True King of all Calamities, but as we saw from the previous ban list, it didn't need Calamities to be able to thrive. Virtual World has always been a very solid deck because it takes advantage of a lot of other cards that really not a lot of the other decks can take advantage of, because the Virtual World archetype has this 3-axis sort of edge where it can go into rank 6s, synchro 9s, and the like. And so one of the biggest strengths that a lot of people have been pivoting over to is the fact that Shen Shen is a crazy card, especially in this particular metagame that's very graveyard reliant. Shen Shen being active turn 1 can just completely hose some of these top tier strategies, because if they're not able to get graveyard set up, I mean, that can just spell game over right then and there. But Virtual World as a combo deck can set up multiple interruptions with a Shen Shen backing it. You have cards such as Ultimaya Zulkin, which allow you to go into Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. You've got cards such as Croco Dragon. Hell, you even have Chuche, which is the main trap card in the deck. And it's one of the reasons why the deck is so strong, because a card that can just continuously pop cards every single turn while simultaneously recycling your engine is actually pretty damn good, and is a very annoying card to deal with because most cards really don't have cards that interact with trap-based removal. And so as a result of that, Chuche just being able to pop a card immediately and just remove it from the field with almost zero way to interact with it can flat out just end a lot of opponents' turns if they don't have a decent follow-up. And so as a result, Virtual World is looking pretty nice this format, and it's actually rather interesting because paired with our number 2 deck, Virtual World became a top 2 deck over in the OCG. Obviously, it's a little different because Calamities is still limited over there, but nonetheless, the deck is still able to be very consistent and can just combo off like no other. A very mid-rangey sort of deck that can kind of play all the roles it has to, and a very just simple, straightforward deck to build as well. Here's a list for you guys to go ahead and look at that actually did very well this past weekend. Once again, you're going to notice the ghost spells in here, and also notice the Psyframe Gear Gamma. This is something that's been on a bit of a decline ever since Dragon Link has had its fall from grace since the most recent bans on the ban list, but nonetheless, it's still a fantastic deck. You're going to expect to see a lot of this because, like I said, it's the 5th most represented deck online at the moment, and with that 60% win rate, the numbers don't lie. Virtual World's coming in at number 3. But coming in at number 2, I already alluded to this one a little bit for anyone who follows the OCG. You're already going to know what's coming up here because that deck is Tri-Brigade. Now, Tri-Brigade did technically suffer a hit on the most recent July ban list with Zodiac Trident getting banned, but it wasn't a direct hit. And what's funny is that Tri-Brigade Zodiac is actually still a deck you can play because Zeus is still a good enough payoff, especially when you're going second, that you don't need Trident to be able to go into because you still have your Borbo, right? And it's one of your best plays for going second. So some players are still opting to play the Tri-Brigade Zodiac version and just opting to forego Trident, and it's perfectly fine. Hell, you can just put another card in your extra deck now and just call it a day. But it's really not a surprise to see Tri-Brigade doing so well. The deck currently boasts a 62% win rate online. It is the 3rd most popular deck that is being played, so you can expect to see this deck a lot. And again, going back to Prank Kid, we've talked about the power of 1-card starters. That is where cards like Tenki and Fractal can just take over, because if you get to any of those cards, you're going to be able to set up your initial combo, and it's going to be very hard for your opponent to catch back up. And thanks to Lightning Overdrive releasing the new Bear Braum, being able to immediately access your Revolt turn 1 and hoping that you don't hard draw it, that just gets your entire engine back in rotation. It also allows you to disrupt your opponent during their turn using Shurag with a non-targeting banish effect, and the deck is just so devastating, so high power, and there's a reason why it's one of the best decks of the format. Tri-Brigade's just a really solid option. I've got another deck list for you guys here to go ahead and take as a template for you to try out for yourself, or maybe just to take some notes from for how you can best counteract it. Keep in mind, you are going to see this deck a lot, especially if you're competing in any of the larger events, like say the Remote Duel YCS coming up here at the end of this week, or maybe any other larger online events you may be participating in, or if your locals are open back up as well, you may expect to see a lot of Tri-Brigade Brigade because this deck is powerful, it's consistent, it is able to just do everything you could want in a deck. It's very well rounded and very well positioned in this current format, and that's why Brigade is coming in at number 2. Now, before we get to my number 1 pick, I did have a few honorable mentions, and that is because thanks to the unbanning of Mirage Stalio and Engage, both Salamangreat and Sky Striker are seeing a huge resurgence of play, so much so that they are actually the first and second most played decks currently in the online environment. If you've been playing online lately, you've probably been seeing a lot of Salamangreat and Sky Striker, and so that's probably why. The interesting thing is, though, is that their win rates aren't necessarily as high as you might expect them to be, because maybe players who've never played the decks before are trying them out, or maybe players are trying to figure out how these decks are supposed to be positioned in this current meta, and so as a result, they're taking more losses as a learning experience, or the decks just aren't nearly that good, and so their win rates are actually reflective of how the decks are actually performing. However, I don't necessarily think that's the case. Salamangreat's sitting at like a 53% win rate, and Sky Striker's below 50%. I think it's like 47 or 48%, but yet when you see there's players left and right that are actually winning these smaller tournaments with Salamangreat, with Sky Striker. There was a Sky Striker player this past weekend that won Gamers Choice's most recent tournament on their grand opening, which was actually a very sizable event considering that it was an in-person tournament. This was the size of like a small regional, and Sky Striker ended up taking the whole thing, going through, I believe, 7 rounds of Swiss and then a top 16 cut. So it had to play 11 rounds with a bare minimum of an X2 record in the first 7 rounds and then go 4-0 from then out. So I think that's pretty good from that perspective. So I'll have that list for you guys to see here as well. I'll put up a Salamangreat list for you guys to take a look at too, just in case you want to have a bit of a reference point there. And even a deck like Ignister is actually seeing a reasonable amount of play too, just doesn't have the win rate to really make it into that top 5. So even though we've covered several decks in today's video, the meta isn't clear cut just as of yet. There's a lot of fluidity and a lot of things shifting around, and people are still trying to figure out what has the best competitive edge, but there is one deck that currently seems to be on top of the rest, and that deck is Drytron. Drytron is coming in with a 63% win rate and the 4th most represented deck online. And when you take that representation and pair it with a win rate that is just dominating all others, you have to give it the number 1 spot. This is effectively just taken over Dragon Link at this point because it has one of the highest ceilings in the game, being able to just completely blow the opponent out turn 1 if they have no responses, going into their Herald of Ultimateness play with several interruptions, and also having the IP Masquerade follow-up to be able to interrupt with something like Unicorn. And then if you can't break through that, which let's be honest, most decks can't, then they're just going to go ahead and access code kill you on the follow-up. The deck is just crazy. Lightning Overdrive really gave this deck what it needs in the form of cards such as Diviner of the Herald, as well as Mu Beta Fafnir. The deck could not have wished for any better support, and we are seeing that in the initial stages of this July format that the deck is performing exactly as it should. People are preparing very heavily both in their mains and side decks for this deck because it is that terrifying, and you'll see left and right of these top results of these tournaments that Drytron is absolutely everywhere. I'll go ahead and post a list up here for you guys to take a look at just as another template. We're even seeing here though that this list in particular is even main decking Artifact Lancia for some of those other banish oriented decks, just to have even a slight edge in those matchups as well. But other Drytron lists are even main decking cards such as Dark Ruler No More or Forbidden Droplet, just to have that edge in the mirror match so that way they can actually fight back against some of these turn 1 boards that Drytron is able to produce. The deck is just absurd. It's just the next incarnation of a combo deck that builds its board, and if the opponent can't break it, the combo player gets rewarded for it. It may not be the most exciting game plan, but to be fair, one of the hallmarks of the strongest deck is how many free wins it can pick up, and to be fair, Drytron does this exceptionally well with the boards it is able to build. Not to mention they have Herald of the Orange Light to be able to negate your hand traps on top of it to make it even more difficult for you to interact with them. But I'm not really too surprised to see this deck at the top. It was only a matter of time before we started getting some initial results in to see whether or not that would be the case. Some people are thinking Brigade would be there, but it looks like Drytron, just going based off the numbers, is just barely eking it out. So for now, for the July 2021 format, Drytron is your number 1 deck to beat, and you can expect to see this deck a lot, so be sure to be prepared. But guys, that's going to do it for my top 5 meta decks of the July 2021 format. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Again, if you plan on buying any cards as a result of watching this video, be sure to use my affiliate links down in the description. They save you 5% off for cards you'd already be buying anyway, so there's no reason not to use them. Thank you all so much again for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the Yu-Gi-Oh progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh. Thanks so much again, and we will see you next time.